$1 million wedding, a stunning church, and an unexpected sound that stopped everything, the neighing of a horse. Nothing would ever be the same. When he entered the church, no one expected such a deep secret to come to light. What happened shocked everyone. The cameras were ready for the I do, but an unexpected visitor turned the day into an unforgettable chaos. The bride looked perfect, but what was about to happen would reveal much more than just wedding vows. The Hawthorne mansion had never been as bustling as it was that morning. The sun shone through the enormous French windows, creating a spectacular light show that reflected off the white flower arrangements scattered throughout. Isabella observed all the commotion from her second-floor bedroom, seated in front of the Venetian mirror, while the makeup artist put the finishing touches on her face. "You look perfect, miss," said Helen, her trusted housekeeper, adjusting for the 10th time the French lace veil that cascaded over the bride's shoulders. Isabella forced a smile, but her eyes betrayed the unease that had been growing in her chest since she awoke. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The first thing she had done upon waking, as she had every morning for the past 15 years, was to go to the window to see Thunder, her equine companion, grazing in the green field that stretched behind the mansion. But that morning, for the first time, the majestic black horse was not there. "Helen, have you seen Thunder today?" Isabella asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The housekeeper paused, adjusting the veil for a moment, exchanging a concerned look with the makeup artist in the mirror. "Don't worry about that now, dear. He must be taking a walk around the stables. You know how independent he is." But Isabella knew Thunder better than anyone. Since her parents had passed away, the horse had become her safe haven, her silent confidant. It was as if a part of her was missing without his constant presence in that field. Her unease grew when, while organizing her purse for the church, she found a folded note among her belongings. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the words were clear and direct. "Listen to Thunder." "Miss Isabella," Helen called, interrupting her thoughts, "it's time to put on your dress." The wedding dress was a work of art in itself. Swarovski crystals sparkled across the entire bodice, cascading down the Italian silk skirt. It had cost a small fortune, hand-picked by Sophia, the wedding planner that Garrett had insisted on hiring. As the assistants helped her into the dress, Isabella thought about Garrett. Her fiancé was considered the perfect catch, heir to one of the country's largest construction companies, educated at the best European universities, with a smile that melted hearts. But in recent weeks, something in his behavior had changed. The phone calls had become shorter, the meetings rarer. When they were together, Garrett seemed distant, always whispering on the phone or having last-minute meetings with his Uncle Ernest, who coincidentally was also the administrator of Isabella's fortune since her parents' disappearance. The sound of hooves on the garden gravel caught her attention. Isabella ran to the window, her heart racing at the possibility of it being Thunder, but it was just the carriage transporting the flower girls arriving. "Is everything all right?" Helen asked, noticing Isabella's disappointed expression. "Yes, she hesitated, fiddling with the engagement ring on her finger. "Helen, do you believe in premonitions?" The housekeeper stopped what she was doing and approached Isabella, holding her hands affectionately. "I believe we should always trust our instincts, dear. They rarely deceive us." At that moment, Sophia burst into the room like a hurricane of efficiency and French perfume. "It's almost time. The guests are already arriving at the church, and the photographers are in position. Isabella, darling, you look like a dream." The planner began giving orders to everyone present, coordinating the final details with the precision of a conductor. Isabella observed everything as if she were in a strange dream, where each detail seemed simultaneously perfect and completely wrong. That's when she noticed something fallen near the dressing table, a small black feather, identical to those from Thunder's mane. Isabella picked it up carefully, feeling its silky texture between her fingers. It was as if her faithful friend was trying to tell her something. Come on, come on!" Sophia clapped her hands, hurrying everyone along. "The limousine is waiting and we can't be late for the wedding of the year." Isabella discreetly tucked the feather into her bouquet of white roses, feeling the weight of the diamond tiara on her head, a family heirloom that her mother had worn at her own wedding. As she descended the mansion's stairs, each step seemed heavier than the last, as if her own body was resisting the path she was about to tread. The sky, previously a perfect blue, was beginning to show some signs of clouds on the horizon. Isabella couldn't help but think, if it was another sign, another warning from fate that something extraordinary was about to happen on what should have been the happiest day of her life. St. Peter's Cathedral had never seemed so imposing as it did that afternoon. Its centuries-old stained glass windows filtered the sunlight, creating a kaleidoscope of colors that danced over the elegantly dressed guests. The limousine stopped smoothly in front of the marble staircase, and Isabella felt her heart race. Even more. "Take a deep breath, dear," whispered Helen, who was accompanying her in the car. "Remember what we talked about. Trust your instincts." The photographers approached like a swarm as soon as the limousine door was opened. Flashes exploded from all sides, capturing every movement of the millionaire bride. Isabella maintained her practiced smile, the one she had learned to use at social events since childhood, but her eyes constantly scanned the environment, still hoping to see thunder somewhere. As she entered the church atrium, Isabella noticed something peculiar. Samuel, Garrett's brother, was standing near the door, holding a thick envelope and wearing a tense expression that didn't match the occasion. When their eyes met, he made a movement as if he wanted to approach, but Sophia quickly intervened between them. "No chit-chat now," the planner declared, adjusting the train of Isabella's dress. "Everyone in position. The wedding march will begin in 2 minutes." The main doors of the cathedral opened, revealing the central aisle covered with white rose petals. Hundreds of faces turned to admire the bride, but Isabella barely noticed them. Her attention was fixed on Garrett, standing at the altar next to the priest. Something in his posture was different. He kept his hands in the pockets of his tuxedo, a gesture his mother had always criticized for showing nervousness. His eyes met hers for a brief moment, before quickly looking away, and Isabella felt a shiver run down her spine. It was then that she noticed the woman. Sitting discreetly in the last row, wearing an elegant hat that partially covered her face, was a stranger who seemed to stand out from the other guests. Not in appearance, her dress was as refined as the others, but in the way she observed the ceremony, as if studying every detail with scientific interest. The wedding march began to play, and Isabella started her walk down the aisle. Each step brought her closer to Garrett, but also increased the feeling that she was walking towards something she didn't fully understand. "Is everything all right?" whispered Ernest, her uncle and legal guardian who was escorting her by the arm. His voice had a tone of concern that Isabella had never noticed before. Before she could answer, a movement on the side of the church caught her attention. Samuel was still holding the envelope, and now he was talking agitatedly with one of the security guards hired for the event. The guard seemed to be trying to prevent him from approaching the altar. When Isabella finally reached the altar, Garrett extended his hand to help her climb the steps. His touch was cold and damp, and she could feel a slight tremor in his fingers. The priest began the ceremony with his solemn voice, but the words seemed distant, as if coming from another world. "We are gathered here." A muffled sound came from outside the church. Some guests shifted in their seats, restless. Isabella clutched her bouquet tighter, feeling thunder's black feather among the flowers. To celebrate the union, the sound grew louder, closer. Now it was impossible to ignore. It was a familiar sound, a sound that Isabella would recognize. Anywhere, the neighing of a horse. Of these two young people, the church doors burst open with a bang. Several guests gasped in surprise, some rising from their seats. There, framed by the light of the setting sun, was Thunder. His black coat shone like obsidian, and his intelligent eyes fixed directly on Isabella. Garrett took a step back, his face losing all color. The mysterious woman in the hat stood up abruptly, her hand instinctively going to her purse. Samuel took advantage of the confusion to advance down the aisle, the envelope still firmly held in his hands. "Isabella," he called out, his voice cutting through the chaos that had ensued. "You need to see this before you say yes." Thunder began to advance down the central aisle, knocking over floral arrangements in his path. The guests moved away, some in fear, others fascinated by the surreal scene unfolding before them. Isabella remained motionless at the altar, her heart beating so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The feather in her bouquet seemed to burn between her fingers, and the words of the mysterious note echoed in her mind. Listen to thunder. The moment of truth had arrived, and she knew her life would never be the same after that day. The chaos in the church reached its peak when Thunder stopped a few meters from Isabella, his deep eyes fixed on her as if trying to convey a silent message. The animal remained there, majestic and imposing, completely ignoring the frightened murmurs of the guests and the security guards' attempts to contain him. "Get that animal out of here," demanded Sophia, her shrill voice cutting through the air. But before anyone could act, Samuel took advantage of the confusion to climb to the altar, positioning himself between Isabella and Garrett. "My brother isn't who you think he is, Isabella," Samuel declared, his voice trembling slightly. "And your Uncle Ernest. They've been working together for months on something you need to know." Garrett advanced towards his brother, his face contorted in an expression Isabella had never seen before. "Shut up, Samuel. You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Samuel laughed humorlessly, opening the envelope he was carrying. "Then I suppose these documents are just my imagination. The records of secret meetings, suspicious bank transfers, contracts prepared to be signed right after the wedding." Ernest, who until then had been observing everything with apparent calm, began to move discreetly towards the side exit of the church. The mysterious woman in the hat also moved, but instead of fleeing, she approached the altar with determined steps. "Miss Hawthorne," she called out, removing her hat and revealing a familiar face that Isabella took a few seconds to recognize. "My name is Claire Matthews. I worked in your parents' accounting office before the accident." Claire's words fell like bombs in the already tense environment. Isabella felt her legs weaken, and Helen quickly approached to support her. Thunder neighed again, as if approving the former employee's presence. "Your parents had discovered irregularities in the company's accounts," Claire continued, ignoring Ernest's furious glares. "They were about to conduct a full audit when the accident happened. After that, Ernest took control of everything, and I was fired with a generous sum to keep my silence." Isabella looked at her uncle, the man who had raised her in recent years, who had organized her life with such care, perhaps too much care. "Is it true, Uncle?" "Isabella, darling, don't believe these people." Ernest tried to approach, but Thunder placed himself between them, his ears laid back in a clear display of hostility. "Everything I did was to protect you, to secure your future." "Protect?" Samuel intervened, spreading some documents on the altar. "You call it protection to arrange a marriage so that Garrett could legally take control of Hawthorne Enterprises, so that you could finally have unrestricted access to all the assets." The guests watched the scene as if they were in a theater, some discreetly filming with their cell phones, others whispering among themselves. Sophia seemed to have given up on maintaining order and was now on the phone, furiously whispering to someone. "Garrett!" Isabella turned to her fiancé, tears threatening to smudge her perfect makeup. "Look me in the eyes and tell me this isn't true." But Garrett couldn't hold her gaze. Instead, he nervously adjusted his tie and took a step back. "Isabella, you don't understand. There are business matters at stake much bigger than the two of us. Your father never knew how to properly manage the family's assets. We were just—" "We!" she interrupted him, her voice gaining strength. "So it is true. All this time. Our relationship, the engagement, this wedding, it was all part of a plan?" Claire approached closer, placing an additional folder on the altar. "I have here copies of all the documents your parents were investigating. I kept everything all these years, waiting for the right moment. When I heard about the wedding and saw the same patterns repeating, I couldn't stay silent." Thunder approached, Isabella gently nudging her shoulder with his muzzle. She automatically raised her hand to the animal's neck, feeling the familiar warmth of his coat. It was then that she noticed something attached to his mane, a small black flash drive. "This was with him when I found him this morning," Claire explained. "It contains all the digital evidence your parents had gathered. They used to hide important information with Thunder, said he was the most trustworthy guardian they knew. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together in Isabella's mind. Thunder's strange behavior that morning, the mysterious note, Garrett's furtive glances, the secret meetings with her uncle. It all made a terrible sense now. Helen, who remained by her side like a silent guardian, gently squeezed her shoulder. "Trust your instincts, dear," she whispered, repeating the advice she had given earlier. "You always knew, deep in your heart, that something wasn't right." Isabella's eyes scanned the church, observing the faces around her. Some showed shock, others curiosity, and some, especially those closer to Ernest and Garrett, looked terribly uncomfortable. The truth was exposed, raw and painful but also liberating. The silence that followed the revelations was deafening. Isabella remained at the altar, her hands still clutching the bouquet of white roses, while her mind processed everything she had just discovered. Thunder's black feather, still intertwined among the flowers, seemed more significant than ever. "We need to call the police," Samuel declared, beginning to organize the scattered documents. "There's enough evidence here to—" "No!" Ernest's voice thundered through the church. "Nobody is calling anyone. Isabella, my dear, you're not going to believe these absurd stories, are you? After everything I've done for you." Isabella took a step forward, feeling a strength she didn't know she possessed grow within her. "What exactly have you done for me, Uncle? Manipulated my life, hidden the truth about my parents, arranged a marriage with someone who never really loved me?" "Love?" Garrett laughed nervously, running his hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Isabella, let's be practical. Marriages in our social class have always been about alliances, about business. Your own parent—" "Don't you dare!" Isabella interrupted him, her voice sharp as steel. "Don't you dare speak about my parents. They truly loved each other, and maybe that's exactly why they posed a threat to your plans." Claire approached, placing a gentle hand on Isabella's shoulder. "Your parents were people of integrity, Isabella. They discovered irregularities in the companies and were determined to correct them, even if it meant facing powerful people. They wanted to leave a legacy of honesty for you." Thunder softly neighed, as if agreeing with Claire's words. The animal had always been more than just a horse. It was a direct link to her parents, to her childhood, to who she really was beneath all the layers of social expectations and imposed obligations. "The guests are leaving," Helen commented discreetly, indicating the church pews that were beginning to empty. Many seemed embarrassed, as if they had witnessed something they shouldn't have. Sophia, the wedding planner, seemed on the verge of a nervous breakdown. "This is a disaster, a complete disaster. What am I going to tell the press? How am I going to explain—" "Enough!" Isabella's voice echoed through the church, surprising everyone with its strength. "Enough of worrying about appearances, about what others will think, about social protocols. Enough of lies." She turned to Garrett, slowly removing the engagement ring from her finger. "You never loved me, did you? It was all just an elaborate plan." Garrett hesitated, and for a moment, a shadow of genuine regret crossed his face. At first it was just a plan. But Isabella, over time, I really started to—" "No," she interrupted him again, placing the ring in his hand. "Don't make this even harder with more lies. It's over." Ernest began to move towards the side exit, but two security guards, who had apparently been alerted by Samuel, blocked his path. "You don't understand," he protested, his face red with anger. "Everything I did was to maintain the empire your father built. He was a dreamer, an idealist. Someone had to make the tough decisions. And those decisions included using me as—" "A pawn in your game?" Isabella questioned, tears finally flowing freely down her face. "Turning me into a puppet for your plans?" Claire opened her purse, taking out more documents. "I have here the original records your parents kept, Isabella. They clearly show how the company was managed before and after they left. The difference is striking." Samuel approached Isabella, his expression softer now. "Forgive me for not speaking up sooner. I only discovered everything a few weeks ago, when I accidentally overheard a conversation between Garrett and Ernest. I tried to gather all the evidence before coming to you." Thunder approached Isabella again, resting his muzzle on her shoulder, as he used to do when she was sad during her teenage years. The familiar gesture brought fresh tears to her eyes, but this time they were different. They were tears of understanding. of acceptance. "You know," she began, stroking Thunder's neck, "I spent so much time trying to be the person everyone expected me to be. The perfect heiress, the ideal bride, the successor worthy of the family legacy. But perhaps the true legacy my parents wanted to leave me was different, the courage to fight for the truth no matter the cost." Helen smiled proudly, helping Isabella remove her veil. "And now, dear, what are you going to do?" Isabella looked at the chaos around her, the scattered documents, the remaining guests whispering, Sophia having a nervous breakdown in the corner, the security guards restraining Ernest, Garrett looking lost without his carefully planned script. Then she looked at Thunder, her faithful companion who once again had proven to be her true guardian. With a fluid motion, Isabella mounted Thunder, the voluminous wedding dress spreading over the animal's black coat like a cascade of snow. The contrast was surreal, the sophisticated Hawthorne heiress still in her wedding attire, riding bareback on a majestic black horse in the middle of a centuries-old church. "Isabella, think carefully about what you're doing," Ernest warned, his voice mixing desperation and authority. "You're throwing away years of planning, your entire future." "No, Uncle," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "For the first time in years, I'm really thinking for myself. And you know what? It's not my future I'm throwing away. It's the future you planned for me." Claire quickly gathered all the documents, including the flash drive, and handed them to Helen. "Guard this with your life," she instructed the housekeeper, who solemnly nodded. "I'll go with you," Samuel offered, taking a step forward. "No," Isabella smiled gently. "You've already done so much for me today, Samuel. Now I need to do this alone." Thunder began to move towards the church exit, his hooves echoing on the marble floor. The few guests who still remained made way, some filming the scene with their cell phones, others simply watching open-mouthed. "Miss Hawthorne," Sophia shouted, running after her. "The journalists outside, what should I tell them?" Isabella stopped Thunder for a moment, turning to the planner. "Tell the truth, Sophia. Say that today there wasn't a wedding, there was an awakening. When the church doors opened, a crowd of photographers and journalists waited outside. The flashes exploded like shooting stars, capturing the moment when Isabella Hawthorne, the heiress everyone thought they knew, chose her own path." "Where are you going?" Helen asked, her voice choked with emotion. "Anywhere," Isabella replied, feeling the wind tousle her elaborate hairdo, "to all the places they never allowed me to go." Thunder galloped through the church gardens, his hooves kicking up rose petals that had been scattered earlier for the bride. Isabella could hear voices calling her name, some in plea, others in warning, but for the first time in her life she chose not to listen. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Isabella guided Thunder through the city streets, ignoring the astonished looks of pedestrians as they saw a bride on horseback cutting through the afternoon traffic. Her cell phone wouldn't stop ringing in the hidden pocket that Helen had sewn into the dress, a precaution that now seemed almost prophetic. But Isabella had no interest in answering, not now, not when she was finally tasting true freedom. After about an hour of riding, she arrived at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. It was a simple place, far from the social circuit she frequented, and perhaps for that very reason perfect. She tied Thunder to a shaded post and entered the establishment, her wedding dress dragging on the worn wooden floor. The owner, a grey-haired lady, widened her eyes at the sight of her, but asked no questions. She simply served the coffee Isabella ordered and placed an extra plate with water for Thunder outside. It was there, sitting in a simple chair in a neighborhood cafe, that Isabella began to plan her next steps. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Ernest wouldn't easily give up control of the Hawthorne empire, and Garrett, well, men like him didn't usually take public humiliation well. Her cell phone vibrated again, but this time it was a message from Claire. "I'm with Helen, documents safe. Samuel is taking care of the legal situation. Count on me for whatever you need." Isabella smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude for those who had chosen to stand by her side. She looked at Thunder through the cafe window. Her faithful friend seemed more relaxed now, drinking the water offered by the owner. "More coffee, dear?" the lady asked, approaching with the thermos. "Yes, please," Isabella replied. realizing it was the first time in years that someone had served her without reverence or formalities. It was refreshing. As she watched the dark liquid fill her cup, Isabella thought about her parents. What would they say if they could see her now? Her runaway bride sitting in a simple cafe, planning how to regain control not only of her inheritance but mainly of her life. Somehow she knew they would be proud, not for the escape itself, but for the courage to face the truth, even when that truth threatened to destroy everything she knew. A group of teenagers passed by on the sidewalk, stopping to take pictures of Thunder and whisper among themselves. Within minutes, her location would probably be revealed on social media. Her time of peace was ending. But this time, Isabella felt no fear. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just the Hawthorne heiress, the perfect bride, or the girl who needed to be protected. She was simply Isabella, and that, she discovered, was more than enough. The sun had already set completely when Isabella decided to leave the cafe. The owner, who introduced herself as Mrs. Zoe, insisted on giving her an old coat to cover the wedding dress. "You'll attract less attention, girl," and a bag of apples for Thunder. "I don't know exactly what happened to you today," said Mrs. Zoe, helping Isabella fold the train of the dress. "But I know how to recognize when someone is running away to find themselves. Sometimes it's the only possible path." Isabella thanked her with a spontaneous hug, surprising herself with the gesture. She couldn't remember the last time she had hugged someone like that, without protocols or formalities. As she untied Thunder from the post, she noticed that several messages had accumulated on her cell phone. Most were from unknown numbers, probably journalists who had gotten her contact. But there was one that caught her attention. It was from Elijah, the family's old horse trainer who had been fired by Ernest shortly after her parents' disappearance. "I imagine you finally discovered the truth. If you need a safe place, the ranch is still standing. Thunder knows the way." The ranch. Isabella felt her heart race at the memory. It was a small piece of land in the mountains where her father used to breed horses before dedicating himself exclusively to business. She had spent some of the happiest moments of her childhood there, learning to ride with Elijah, playing in the stables, watching her father work with the animals. "What do you think, friend?" she asked Thunder, caressing his neck. "Can you take us there?" In response, the horse softly neighed and began to trot towards the road leading out of the city. Isabella smiled, adjusting the borrowed coat over her shoulders. The night was getting colder, and she knew the journey to the ranch would take a few hours. As they rode, leaving the city lights behind, Isabella allowed her memories to flow. She remembered her father explaining how each horse had a unique personality, her mother reading stories to her in the barn on rainy afternoons, Elijah teaching her how to care for a newborn foal. Her cell phone vibrated again. It was Helen. "Dear, everything's chaos here. Ernest is furious, threatening to call in lawyers. Garrett has disappeared, but Samuel is keeping everything under control. Claire is organizing all the documents with the help of some trusted lawyers. Where are you?" "I'm safe, Helen," Isabella replied, choosing her words carefully. "There are some things I need to figure out on my own now. Trust me." "Always, my dear, always." The road became increasingly steep and the city lights were now just a distant glow on the horizon. Thunder maintained a steady and sure pace, as if he really knew the way, even after so many years. That's when Isabella spotted a pickup truck parked on the shoulder, its headlights off. Her heart raced for a moment, but then she recognized the approaching silhouette. It was Elijah. "I knew you'd come," he said simply, a gentle smile on his weather-beaten face. "Come, I'll guide you the rest of the way. The trails have changed a bit in recent years." Elijah got into his pickup truck, guiding Isabella and Thunder along back roads and trails, almost invisible in the darkness. After another hour of travel, they arrived at a familiar clearing. The ranch looked different from her memories, smaller, more weathered by time, but it still emanated that sense of home that Isabella had missed so much. "It's not much," Elijah commented, noticing her gaze. "I managed to buy the place when your uncle decided to sell years ago. I keep some rescued horses here, give some riding lessons to kids from the area. It's not the equestrian center your father dreamed of, but—" "It's perfect," Isabella interrupted, dismounting from Thunder carefully so as not to tear the wedding dress any further. "It's exactly what I needed." Elijah led her to the main house, a simple but welcoming construction. Inside, a table was set with coffee, homemade bread, and jam. "Teresa, my wife, prepared something for you to eat," he explained. "We figured you probably haven't eaten properly today." Isabella felt tears in her eyes as she sat at the rustic table. It was amazing how simple gestures of kindness could touch so deeply someone who had lived surrounded by luxury and sophistication. "Elijah," she began after taking a sip of coffee, "did you know about my parents? About Ernest?" The old trainer sat across from her, his face assuming a serious expression. "I suspected. Your father trusted me a lot, told me about his concerns with some company practices. The week before the accident, he asked me to always keep an eye on. Thunder said the horse might be important one day. I didn't understand at the time, but now..." Isabella nodded, the pieces of the puzzle continuing to fit together. "And why did you never tell me?" "You were very young and Ernest had eyes and ears everywhere. I had to wait for the right moment, wait until you were ready to discover the truth on your own. And today, when I saw the news about your wedding, something told me the moment had come." Morning arrived at the ranch, bringing a soft mist that covered the fields like a natural veil. Isabella woke up in the small guest room, still wearing the t-shirt and pants borrowed from Teresa, Elijah's wife. Her wedding dress was carefully folded over a chair, a silent reminder of the events of the previous day. After dressing in simple clothes that Teresa had set aside for her, Isabella went down to the kitchen, where the smell of fresh coffee and homemade bread filled the air. Teresa was at the stove, preparing breakfast, while Elijah read some papers at the kitchen table. "Good morning, dear," Teresa greeted her with a welcoming smile. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than in years," Isabella replied, surprising herself with the truth in her words. "Can I help with anything?" Teresa laughed softly. "The hawthorn. Harris wants to help make breakfast. What will the world say?" "The world is already saying a lot," Elijah commented, showing his tablet with several headlines about the wedding of the century that didn't happen. "The newspapers are in an uproar, Isabella. Your uncle is giving interviews saying you had a nervous breakdown." Isabella sat at the table, accepting the cup of coffee that Teresa offered her. "Classic Uncle Ernest, trying to make me look unstable, but this time it won't work. Not with all the evidence we have." Speaking of evidence, Elijah stood up and went to an old cabinet in the corner of the kitchen. "There's something I need to show you." He returned with a dusty wooden box, the kind of thing that would easily go unnoticed on a ranch full of antiques. But when Elijah opened it, Isabella felt her heart stop for a moment. Inside were photos, documents, and a diary she would recognize anywhere. "Mom's diary," she whispered, picking up the leather-bound notebook with trembling hands. "But how?" "Your father gave me this box a week before the accident," Elijah explained, sitting down again. "Said it was insurance in case something happened to them. At the time I thought he was being paranoid, but your father was always a cautious man." Isabella opened the diary, immediately recognizing her mother's elegant handwriting. The last entries were particularly interesting. They spoke of worrying discoveries in the companies, about tense meetings with the board, about the growing distrust towards Ernest. "My mother knew," Isabella murmured, tears blurring her vision. "She knew something was wrong, that Ernest was manipulating the accounts." "Your parents were extraordinary people, Isabella," Teresa commented, sitting down with them at the table. "They came here to the ranch a lot, especially in the last few months. Your father said it was the only place where he could think clearly, away from the pressures of the city." Continuing to explore the box, Isabella found old photos of the ranch in its glory days, award-winning horses in the stables, equestrian competitions, her father smiling proudly next to the animals. There were also documents detailing a project she had never known existed. "The Hawthorne Equine Rehabilitation Center," she read aloud, examining the architectural plans. "Dad was planning to transform the ranch into a horse therapy center?" Elijah nodded, a nostalgic gleam in his eyes. It was his dream, to use the healing power of horses to help people. He believed that the family's money should serve a greater purpose than just generating more wealth. "But Ernest was against it," Teresa added, her voice carrying a hint of bitterness. "Said it was a waste of resources, that the Hawthorne family couldn't afford to do charity. Isabella continued exploring the documents, finding more evidence of Ernest's manipulations, altered reports, suspicious contracts, notes about secret meetings. Her father had meticulously documented everything. "That's why thunder is so special," Elijah commented, looking out the window where the black horse was grazing peacefully. "He was your father's favorite horse for the experimental therapy sessions we did here. He had a natural gift for connecting with people, especially children." Suddenly, something in the documents caught Isabella's attention. A series of geographic coordinates written on the last page of her mother's diary, along with a code she didn't recognize. "Elijah, does this mean anything to you?" she asked, showing him the notes. The old trainer examined the numbers for a moment, his expression subtly changing. "Well, the coordinates point to a specific spot here on the ranch. But as for the code, your father had a hidden safe in one of the old stables. I never knew the combination, but maybe we need to check." Isabella stood up, energized by the possibility of more discoveries. "Where is this stable?" "Calm down, young lady," Teresa gently interrupted her. "First, you need to eat properly. The stable has been there for years. It can wait another half hour." Isabella wanted to protest, but her stomach growled in agreement with Teresa. Besides, she knew she needed to keep a clear head to process all this new information. As she ate the breakfast prepared by Teresa, Isabella watched through the window as the sun dissipated the mist over the fields. The ranch, which had begun as a temporary refuge, was revealing itself to be much more than that. It was a portal to the past, a direct connection to her parents, and possibly the key to her future. The old stable was in the most remote part of the ranch, partially hidden by a small eucalyptus grove. As they walked there, Elijah explained how the place used to be used for specialized training of horses intended for therapy. "Your father adapted everything here," he commented, opening the heavy wooden door. "He installed special equipment, developed his own training techniques. It was revolutionary for the time." The interior of the stable was surprisingly well preserved, considering the years of abandonment. Beams of light entered through the cracks in the roof, illuminating the space in mysterious patterns. The smell of old hay and wood mixed with the memory of more active days. "There," Elijah pointed to a wall at the back, where several old saddles were hanging. "The safe is behind that wooden panel." Isabella approached, carefully examining the wall. At first glance, it looked like a solid structure, but upon pressing certain points, a soft click revealed a hidden mechanism. The panel slid to the side, revealing a digital safe embedded in the wall. "The code from the diary," she murmured, taking out her mother's notes from her pocket. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed the numbers on the small, illuminated screen. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a soft hum filled the air and the safe door opened with a metallic sigh. Inside, there was a leather folder, some flash drives, and a letter addressed to Isabella in her father's handwriting. She picked up the envelope reverently, feeling the weight of the unread words. "Dear Isabella," she began to read aloud, her voice choked with emotion. "If you're reading this, it means our suspicions were correct and something happened to us. It also means that you were strong enough to discover the truth on your own." Elijah placed a comforting hand on her shoulder as she continued reading. "The Hawthorne Empire was always more than just business. It was a means to make a difference in the world. When we discovered Ernest's manipulations, we knew we had to act. But he had powerful allies, connections that went beyond what we could. Imagine, this ranch, this dream of a rehabilitation center, was our way of rescuing our family's true purpose." Isabella paused, wiping away the tears that were freely flowing down her face. Teresa, who had joined them in the stable, offered her a handkerchief. "The documents in this safe," the letter continued, "contain all the evidence needed to expose the truth. But more important than that, they contain the complete plans for the rehabilitation center. This was the legacy we wanted to leave for you, daughter, not just money or status, but a purpose." As she examined the other items in the safe, Isabella found detailed blueprints, feasibility studies, and even a manifesto explaining the philosophy behind the project. Her parents had thought of everything. "There's one more thing," Elijah commented, pointing to a smaller compartment inside the safe. "Looks like a locket." Isabella carefully removed it. It was an antique piece with the Hawthorne family crest engraved in gold. When she opened it, she found a miniature photo, herself as a baby, in her parents' arms, with a young Thunder in the background. "I remember that day," Elijah smiled. "It was when Thunder arrived at the ranch. Your father said you two had a special connection from the first moment." A distant sound of an engine interrupted the moment. Teresa ran to the stable door and came back with a worried expression. "There's a car coming up the main road," she warned. "We don't usually get visitors here." Isabella felt her heart race. "Do you think it could be Ernest's people?" "We're not going to wait to find out," Elijah quickly decided. "There's an exit through the back of the stable that leads to a secondary trail. Teresa, take Isabella that way. I'll distract whoever it is." "I can't let you face this alone," Isabella protested, but Elijah was firm. "Your safety is more important now. Besides," he smiled, "it's not the first time I've had to deal with unwanted people around here." Teresa quickly led Isabella through the back exit, while she carefully stored the documents and the letter in her bag. The sound of the engine was getting closer. "Thunder," Isabella whispered, worried about her faithful companion. "Don't worry," Teresa reassured her. "He always finds a way to hide when necessary. Now let's go. I know a safe place where we can wait." As they moved away through the eucalyptus grove, Isabella could hear distant voices arriving at the ranch. Her heart was torn between concern for Elijah and excitement over the recent discoveries. One thing was certain: the secrets of the stable had changed everything, not just her understanding of the past, but also her vision of the future. Teresa guided Isabella along a narrow trail that wound between the eucalyptus trees, moving further and further away from the main stable. The strong scent of the trees mixed with the damp earth beneath their feet, while the sound of voices and engines became increasingly distant. "Here," Teresa whispered, indicating a small structure almost completely covered by vines. "It was the old observation post your father used to monitor the horses during the night." The interior was small but cozy, with a window that offered a privileged view of the ranch. Through it, Isabella could see two black cars parked near the main house. Men in suits, clearly out of place in the rural environment, were talking to Elijah. "Can you hear what they're saying?" Isabella asked, trying to read the lips of the men in the distance. "We don't need to hear to know they're your uncle's lawyers," Teresa replied, carefully closing the door of the post. "It's not the first time they've shown up around here." Isabella turned to the woman, surprised. "What do you mean? They've been here before?" Teresa sighed, sitting down on an improvised bench. "After your parents left, Ernest tried everything to buy the ranch back. He offered absurd amounts, tried to pressure Elijah with lawsuits, even threatened to expose supposed irregularities in the purchase. But your father had been very clever. He left everything documented, every detail of the sale legally registered." "Why did he want the ranch back so badly?" Isabella asked, more to herself than to Teresa, as she took out the documents found in the safe. Among the pages of financial reports and rehabilitation center projects, one document in particular caught her attention. It was a geological analysis of the region, with specific markings in the ranch area. "My God," Isabella murmured, her eyes quickly scanning the information. "There's a mineral water source under the ranch, one of the largest in the region." Teresa nodded. "Your father discovered this when he was planning the facilities for the rehabilitation center. The water would be used for hydrotherapy with the horses, but apparently Ernest had other plans for it." The sound of a twig breaking outside made the two women freeze. Footsteps were approaching the observation post. Isabella held her breath, clutching the documents to her chest. "Easy," a familiar voice whispered, and soon Samuel appeared at the door. "It's me." "Samuel," Isabella exclaimed in a relieved whisper. "How did you find us?" "Helen gave me the location," he quickly explained, entering and closing the door. "I came as soon as I knew Ernest's lawyers were on their way, but I didn't come alone. Claire is waiting in a car on the secondary road with all the documents organized." Teresa peeked through the window again. "The men are still with Elijah. He's smart. He'll keep them busy as long as possible." "We need to act quickly," Samuel declared, sitting down with them. "Ernest is moving all the pieces he..." Can. He's already filed for your interdiction, Isabella, claiming emotional instability. He's trying to freeze your accounts, take full control of the companies. He won't succeed, Isabella replied, her voice carrying a new strength. Not with all the evidence we have now. She showed Samuel the documents found in the safe, including the geological analysis. His eyes widened as he understood the implications. This explains a lot, he murmured. Ernest has been investing heavily in the mineral water sector in recent years. He must have discovered the source when your father started studies for the rehabilitation center. A distant neigh cut through the air. It was thunder somewhere near the forest. Isabella felt her heart calm a little, knowing her faithful friend was safe. What's the plan now? Teresa asked, watching the lawyers finally returning to their cars. Samuel smiled, a determined gleam in his eyes. Claire managed to schedule an extraordinary board meeting for tomorrow. All the main shareholders will be present. It's our chance to expose everything. But Ernest will certainly try to prevent Isabella from attending, Teresa argued. That's why we need to be smarter than him, Isabella declared, an idea beginning to form in her mind. Samuel, you said Claire has all the documents organized. Yes, including those we found at the church. Why? Isabella stood up, carefully, storing the new documents in her bag. Because it's time to stop running and start fighting, but we're going to need help. Teresa, do you think Elijah still keeps in touch with the ranch's former employees? Yes, many still live in the region. They're loyal people who loved your parents. Great, Isabella smiled, a plan taking shape in her mind. Because tomorrow we're going to give Ernest a surprise he'll never forget. Through the window, they could see the lawyers' cars finally leaving the property. Elijah remained standing in the yard, politely waving until they disappeared down the road. Only then did his shoulders relax. Let's go, Isabella decided, adjusting the bag with the documents. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and little time. As they left the observation post, the sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was the same sky her parents had observed so many times from that very ranch, dreaming of a better future. Now, it was up to Isabella to turn that dream into reality. The night at the ranch was one of intense activity. Teresa's kitchen transformed into an improvised command center, where maps and documents mixed with coffee cups and traditional homemade bread. Claire had arrived with more allies, 2 trusted lawyers and a corporate governance specialist. The shareholders are divided, Claire explained, spreading a list of names on the table. Some are still loyal to Ernest, but others have started asking questions after the episode at the church. The video of your horse interrupting the wedding went viral. People are fascinated by the story. And scared, added Dr. Beatrice, the governance specialist. Hawthorne Enterprises stocks fell 5% today. Investors hate scandals and instability. Isabella observed the movement around her, amazed at how many people had mobilized to help her. Elijah had kept his word. Former ranch employees were beginning to arrive, bringing stories, documents, and an unwavering loyalty to her parents' memory. Mrs. Marina, Isabella exclaimed, recognizing her father's former secretary. The lady, now with completely white hair, hugged her affectionately. You're the spitting image of your mother, girl. Marina smiled, her eyes shining with contained tears. I have something that might help. She opened her purse, taking out an old notebook. These are the notes I made of all the suspicious meetings in the last few months before the accident. Your father asked me to record everything. Samuel and Claire immediately began examining the notebook, their expressions lighting up with each page. This is extraordinary, Claire murmured. We have here a clear pattern of financial manipulation. Marina documented every suspicious move, every questionable transfer. And that's not all, Marina added, lowering her voice. In the last week, before they left, your parents began secretly transferring part of the company's resources to a special account. It was to finance the rehabilitation center. Isabella felt her heart race. And what happened to that money? It's protected, Marina smiled, in an account that can only be accessed with your signature and a special code, a code that only Thunder knows. All eyes turned to the window, where the black horse was grazing peacefully under the moonlight. Isabella was beginning to understand the genius of her parents. They had created a contingency plan, as complex as it was brilliant. "But we still need something more," Dr. Beatrice pondered, adjusting her glasses. "Something that definitively proves Ernest's involvement in the financial manipulations." That's when Helen, who had arrived recently, discreetly cleared her throat. "Maybe I can help with that," she said, taking a small device from her purse. "I installed cameras in the mansion's library a few months ago, after noticing suspicious behaviors. Last night, after Isabella ran away, Ernest had a very interesting conversation with Garrett." The group watched in silence the video on Claire's laptop. In the recording, a visibly altered Ernest admitted his participation in various schemes, including the attempt to manipulate the wedding to take full control of the companies. "This is gold," one of the lawyers smiled. "With this and the other documents, we have a solid case." Teresa, who had gone out to prepare more coffee, returned with a worried expression. "There's movement on the main road, several cars approaching." Elijah ran to check. "It's them. Ernest and his team, they must have discovered that Isabella is here." "It's not time for confrontation yet," Samuel quickly decided. "We need to ensure that Isabella makes it to the board meeting tomorrow." "I'll take care of that," declared a firm voice from the kitchen door. Everyone turned to see Mrs. Zoe, the owner of the cafe where Isabella had taken refuge the day before. "I have an old van that I use for bread deliveries. No one will suspect." Quickly, an escape plan was organized. While Ernest's cars approached on the main road, Isabella and a small essential group prepared to leave through the back of the ranch. "Thunder," Isabella hesitated, looking at her faithful companion. "He'll be fine," Elijah assured. "In fact, I have a special role for him tomorrow." Before leaving, Isabella took one last look at the ranch through the kitchen window. The full moon illuminated the fields where her parents had dreamed of building something special. Tomorrow that dream would have a new chance. "Is everyone ready?" Mrs. Zoe asked, the van keys jingling in her hands. Isabella nodded, clutching the folder with the documents to her chest. The final confrontation was approaching, and this time, she was prepared to fight. Mrs. Zoe's van wound through the back roads leading to the city, its lights purposely turned off to avoid drawing attention. In the cargo compartment, among boxes of bread and cakes, Isabella and Claire were reviewing all the documents one last time, meticulously organizing them by the light of a small flashlight. "Each piece needs to be presented at the exact moment," Claire explained, separating the documents into colored folders. "First, we'll show the oldest irregularities, establishing a pattern. Then we reveal the recent manipulations and finally the wedding plan." Samuel, who was driving alongside Mrs. Zoe, maintained constant contact with their allies through coded messages. Helen just warned, "Ernest is furious. He turned the ranch upside down but of course found nothing important." "And Thunder?" Isabella asked, concern evident in her voice. "He's safe," Samuel smiled in the rearview mirror. "Elijah was right. Your horse is smarter than many people. Disappeared into the forest as soon as the cars arrived." Mrs. Zoe kept her eyes fixed on the road, her experienced hands guiding the vehicle with precision through paths that few knew. "My late husband worked on the construction of these roads," she commented. "I know every shortcut, every detour. Nobody will find us here." Claire's cell phone vibrated. It was an email from Dr. Beatrice. "More news," she announced, reading quickly. The handwriting expert confirmed, "The signatures on the documents Ernest used to transfer part of the company's assets are forged." "He forged my parents' signatures?" Isabella felt a wave of indignation rise in her chest. "Not just theirs," Claire continued, reading. "There are also forgeries of your signature, Isabella, on documents dated from when you were still a minor." Samuel cursed softly. "He started preparing the ground years ago. He probably planned all this since before my parents' accident," Isabella completed, a painful truth crystallizing in her mind. The silence that followed was interrupted by the sound of rotors. A helicopter was flying over the region. "Don't worry," Mrs. Zoe remained calm. "We're protected by the tree canopy. Besides, we're almost at our destination." The destination was a small inn on the outskirts of the city, run by John, Mrs. Zoe's brother. The place, simple but welcoming, would be the team's headquarters during the night, allowing everyone to rest for a few hours before the board meeting. Upon arrival, they were greeted by Marina, who had already prepared everything for the final phase of the plan. The former secretary had transformed one of the inn's rooms into an improvised operations center with computers, printers, and all the necessary infrastructure. "I got access to the company's old records," she announced, showing a series of spreadsheets on her laptop, including some that Ernest thought he had destroyed. "I always kept backups of everything, following your father's guidelines." Isabella hugged the lady affectionately. "You risked a lot keeping this information all these years." "Your family always took care of all of us, girl," Marina replied, with teary eyes. "It was the least I could do." Claire, who was analyzing the new documents, let out a surprised exclamation. "This is amazing! We have here the record of a secret meeting between Ernest and representatives of the Mineral Water Company, dated a week before the accident. They were already negotiating the exploitation of the ranch's source. And there's more," Marina added, opening another folder on her computer. "I found old emails from your father, Isabella. He was preparing a complete dossier on Ernest's suspicious activities. He was planning to present everything to the board, but didn't get the chance," Isabella completed, feeling a lump in her throat. Samuel, who was coordinating the location's security with some trusted men, approached with his cell phone. "Helen just sent a coded message. Ernest called an emergency meeting with his lawyers at the mansion. Looks like he suspects something big is going to happen tomorrow." "And he's right," Isabella declared, her voice carrying a new determination. "Tomorrow, finally, the truth will come to light." Mrs. Zoe, who was observing everything with the wisdom of years, approached Isabella with a cup of tea. "Drink this, girl. It's a special herbal blend. It will help you rest. Tomorrow will be a decisive day and you'll need all your strength." As she savored the tea, Isabella observed the movement around her. Claire and Marina organizing documents, Samuel coordinating security, Mrs. Zoe taking care of everyone with her maternal way. They were simple, honest people who had chosen to stand by her side in the pursuit of justice. Suddenly, a familiar sound came through the open window. A distant neigh, unmistakable. Thunder was nearby, as if wanting to remind her that, even in the most difficult moments, she was never alone. The full moon shone in the sky, the same moon that had witnessed her escape from the church the day before. In less than 24 hours, her life had changed completely. Tomorrow it would change even more. The day had barely begun to dawn when the inn was already buzzing with activity. Claire and Dr. Beatrice were making final adjustments to the presentation. That would be made to the board, while Samuel coordinated with Helen the security details for entering the Hawthorne Enterprises building. Ernest doubled the security, Helen informed through a video call. He hired a special team to control access. He's clearly expecting some kind of move from us. He still doesn't know everything we have, Samuel smiled, confident. Our main advantage is that he underestimates Isabella. He always saw her as a naive girl he could easily manipulate. Isabella, who was finishing getting dressed in one of the rooms, looked at herself in the mirror. The reflection she saw was very different from the produced bride of 2 days ago. Dressed in a navy blue suit that Marina had provided, her face showed a determination she never knew she possessed. "You look just like your mother," Marina commented, entering the room with a small box in her hands. "And that reminded me. I kept this all these years, waiting for the right moment." Inside the box was a delicate brooch with the Hawthorne family crest, the same one her mother used to wear on important occasions. "For good luck," Marina explained, helping her pin the brooch to the lapel of her suit. A commotion coming from outside caught everyone's attention. John, Mrs. Zoe's brother, hurriedly entered the inn. "There's strange movement on the main road," he warned. "Several black cars. They seem to be Ernest's security. They're doing systematic searches in the region." "Then we need to move now," Claire decided, starting to gather the documents. "We can't risk them finding us here." The original plan was to wait until later to head to the company building, but circumstances demanded adaptation. Quickly, the team began to organize for departure. "Mrs. Zoe, can you take us through an alternative route?" Samuel asked. The lady smiled, her wrinkles accentuating. I know a path through the old farms. It'll take a bit longer, but it's totally safe. As they were storing the last documents, a familiar sound made Isabella run to the window. Thunder was standing in the small inn-yard, saddled and ready with Elijah by his side. You didn't think we'd let you face this alone, did you? Elijah smiled. The plan was quickly readjusted, while most of the team would follow Mrs. Zoe along. The alternative route, Isabella and Elijah would go on horseback through an even more secret path, known only to the old residents of the region. Through the backfields of the Santana farm, Elijah explained, then crossing the dry creek. There's a side entrance to the company building near the old parking lot. Helen ensured we'll have access there. Claire divided the documents into 2 sets, handing the safety copies to Isabella. This way we ensure that at least one version will reach the board, no matter what happens. The sun was beginning to tinge the sky with shades of pink and orange when the group separated. Mrs. Zoe's van left first, carrying Claire, Samuel, and the others. Minutes later, Isabella mounted Thunder with Elijah on another horse by her side. Your father used to say, Elijah commented as they rode through the dewy fields, that sometimes we need to lose everything to find what really matters. Isabella reflected on these words. In just 2 days, she had lost a fiancé, discovered betrayals, fled from her own wedding, and defied all the social conventions she knew. But she had also found true friends, recovered precious memories, and, most importantly, discovered her own strength. The cell phone in her pocket vibrated. It was a message from Helen. Ernest just arrived at the building. He's meeting with the lawyers in the president's office. Garrett is there too. They're nervous, Elijah commented, reading the message. Nervous people make mistakes. They carefully crossed the dry creek, the horses' hooves raising small clouds of dust. In the distance, the Hawthorne Enterprises building was already visible, its mirrored windows reflecting the rising sun. Are you ready? Elijah asked, when they stopped briefly for the horses to drink water. Isabella touched the brooch on her lapel, feeling the cold metal under her fingers. She thought about her parents, their dreams for the ranch, all the people who had risked so much to help her get this far. Yes, she answered, her voice firm. It's time to restore the true legacy of the Hawthorne family. Thunder softly neighed, as if agreeing. The sun finally emerged completely on the horizon, promising a new day, a day of truths, confrontations, and most importantly, justice. The lobby of the Hawthorne Enterprises building was busier than usual for an early morning. Extra security patrolled each entrance, executives arrived hurriedly for the extraordinary board meeting, and a buzz of speculation filled the air. Helen was waiting at the side entrance, exactly as promised. Her years as the family's housekeeper had guaranteed her access to virtually all areas of the building, and no one questioned her presence there so early. The shareholders are already arriving, she whispered, guiding Isabella and the others through a service corridor. Ernest is in the president's office with his lawyers, very agitated. Garrett arrived a short while ago, looking nervous. Claire, Samuel, and the rest of the team, who had arrived minutes earlier through the garage entrance, were already waiting in a smaller meeting room, preparing the final details of the presentation. We got access to the internal system, Claire informed, showing her laptop. Marina worked her magic. We have full control over the auditorium presentation. Dr. Beatrice approached Isabella, slightly adjusting the brooch on her lapel. Remember, stay calm, don't let Ernest provoke you. The more controlled you are, the more he'll destabilize. A commotion coming from the corridor indicated that more people were arriving. Through the glass door, they could see several shareholders heading to the main auditorium. Some faces were familiar from the parties and social events Isabella used to attend. It's time, Samuel declared, checking his watch. Helen, are you sure about the flash drive? The housekeeper nodded. Everything's ready in the control room. At the right moment, the video will be transmitted on all the building's monitors. Isabella took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Through the window, she could see Thunder in the back parking lot, where Elijah was keeping him protected. The horse seemed to sense the tension in the air, his posture alert and attentive. "Let's do this the right way," she declared, picking up her folder with the documents. "For my parents' memory, for the ranch's future, for all the people who trusted us." The group split up, each assuming their previously established position. Claire and Dr. Beatrice headed to the auditorium first, naturally blending in with the other meeting participants. Samuel and Marina stayed in the rear, ready to provide technical support. When Isabella entered the auditorium, the buzz of conversations diminished significantly. All eyes turned to her, the runaway bride, the rebel heiress who had abandoned her own wedding so spectacularly. Ernest, who was talking to some executives near the stage, froze when he saw her. His expression quickly changed from surprise to contained anger. "Isabella," he approached, trying to maintain a forced smile. "What a pleasant surprise. Although I think you shouldn't be here, considering your emotional state." "On the contrary, Uncle," she replied, her voice clear and firm. "This is exactly where I should be. After all, this is still my family's company." Garrett, who was observing the scene from a corner of the auditorium, seemed to want to disappear. His face was pale and he kept nervously adjusting his tie. The board president, Dr. Mendoza, took the stage to start the meeting. He was a respected man in the market, known for his integrity. Isabella knew he would be crucial for what was about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we are gathered here to discuss recent events and their implications for the future of Hawthorne Enterprises. As you all know—" "Excuse me, Dr. Mendoza." Isabella stood up, her voice firm, echoing through the auditorium. "Before we proceed, there's something everyone here needs to see." Ernest stepped forward, his face red with anger. "This is absurd. My niece is not in a condition—" "Let her speak." A familiar voice sounded from the back of the auditorium. It was Sophia, the wedding planner. "I think everyone here deserves to know the truth." Dr. Mendoza observed the scene for a moment before nodding. "Proceed, Miss Hawthorne." Isabella walked to the stage, each step laden with determination. When she positioned herself in front of the microphone, she saw not just the attentive faces before her. She saw her parents' legacy, the ranch's future, the dreams that needed to be protected. The auditorium was in complete silence as the first pieces of evidence were projected onto the giant screen. Claire controlled the presentation with precision, each document appearing at the exact moment to maximize its impact. "These are the original company records," Isabella explained, pointing to the projections. "And these are the altered documents that were presented to shareholders in recent years. Note the discrepancies in dates, values, signatures." Ernest abruptly stood up. "This is ridiculous. These documents could have been forged, manipulated, like these signatures were manipulated, Uncle." Isabella interrupted him as Claire projected the forensic handwriting analysis reports. "Dr. Beatrice, here present, is one of the country's leading experts in corporate governance. She can explain in detail each irregularity found." The murmur in the auditorium increased. Some shareholders began frantically leafing through their own copies of the annual reports, others whispering with their advisors. "But this is just the beginning," Isabella continued. "The real plan was much more ambitious. Marina, please." The former secretary activated the next set of evidence: emails, meeting records, suspicious bank transfers. Each new document was a piece of the puzzle that revealed the extent of the conspiracy. "As you can see," Claire took over the explanation, her voice professional and precise, "there was a systematic plan to take full control of the companies. The arranged marriage was just the final step." Garrett, who had remained silent until then, stood up. "Isabella, I can explain—" "You don't need to, Garrett," she interrupted him, her tone surprisingly gentle. "Helen, I think it's time for the video." The auditorium screens flickered for a moment before displaying the library recording. Ernest and Garrett openly discussing their plans on the night after the failed wedding. The confession was clear, undeniable. Ernest's face went livid. He stood up, walking towards the stage. "You don't understand, Isabella. Everything I did was to protect the empire your father built. He was a dreamer, an idealist who wanted to turn our investment company into a charity institution." "No, Uncle," Isabella replied, her voice laden with contained emotion. "You're the one who never understood. My father wasn't just a dreamer, he was a visionary. He knew that the true value of an empire isn't measured just in figures, but in the impact it can have on people's lives. With a gesture, she signaled Claire to show the plans for the Equine Rehabilitation Center. This was my parents' real project, a place that would combine business innovation with social responsibility. And you know what else we discovered, Uncle? The mineral water source on the ranch. Ernest staggered slightly, leaning on a chair. Some shareholders began to stand up, their expressions varying between shock and indignation. The geological reports are all here, Samuel complimented, distributing folders to the board members, along with records of secret negotiations for exploiting the area. Dr. Mendoza, who had been watching everything with meticulous attention, finally spoke up. Mr. Ernest, do you have anything to say in your defense? Before he could answer, a familiar sound echoed through the building. Thunder's neigh, coming from the parking lot. As if on cue, the auditorium doors opened, and Elijah entered, accompanied by several former ranch employees. These, Isabella presented, are some of the people who helped build my parents' dream. People who were pushed away over the years because they knew the truth, because they refused to participate in the schemes. Marina approached the microphone. I worked with Richard Hawthorne for 20 years. He had a dream of transforming that ranch into a place of healing and hope. And I kept every piece of evidence, every document that proved how that dream was sabotaged. The auditorium erupted in heated discussions. Some shareholders were demanding a full audit, others calling for Ernest's immediate removal. Garrett had discreetly disappeared during the tumult. Order, please. Dr. Mendoza banged the gavel. It's clear we need to take immediate action. I propose the temporary suspension of Mr. Ernest from his duties until a full investigation is conducted. You can't do this, Ernest shouted, his control finally breaking. I built this. I kept this company alive while you were dreaming about horses and charity. No, Uncle, Isabella declared, her voice echoing through the auditorium. You merely usurped something that never belonged to you, and now it's time to return the Hawthorne legacy to its true purpose. 6 months passed since the meeting that changed the fate of Hawthorne Enterprises. The ranch, once abandoned, now pulsed with new life. The old stables had been restored, and the sound of hooves and children's laughter echoed through the verdant fields. Isabella observed the movement from the veranda of the main house, which now served as the administrative center of the Hawthorne Institute for Equine Therapy. Thunder grazed peacefully near the fence, occasionally raising his head to observe. The therapy sessions happening in the main riding arena. The results of the first semester exceeded all expectations, Claire commented, approaching with a folder of reports. The equine therapy program has already served over 100 children, and the waiting list keeps growing. And the mineral water source? Isabella asked, although she already knew the answer. It's being sustainably exploited exactly as your parents planned, Claire smiled. The profits are fully reinvested to maintain and expand the Institute's social programs. The sound of an approaching car caught the attention of both. It was Samuel, returning from another meeting of the Hawthorne Enterprises Administrative Board, where he now held a director position. The audits are finally complete, he announced, climbing the veranda steps. All the diversions have been identified, and the resources are being recovered. Isabella nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. Ernest had been permanently removed from the company, now facing legal processes for his actions. Garrett, after a period of disappearance, eventually turned himself in to the authorities and cooperated with the investigations in exchange for leniency. Helen called earlier, Samuel continued. Said she found more old photos in the mansion's attic. Thought you'd like to see them. I'll go get coffee, Claire offered, leaving uncle and niece alone. Samuel took an envelope from his jacket, handing it to Isabella. Inside were photographs she had never seen, her parents young, working on the ranch, caring for the first horses, smiling with hope in their eyes. They would be proud, Samuel commented softly, not just because you uncovered the truth, but mainly for what you're doing with it. The sound of children's laughter caught both their attention. In the arena, Elijah was conducting an equine therapy session with a girl who, until a few weeks ago, could barely communicate. Now, seated on one of the therapy horses, she was smiling and talking with her therapists. Mrs. Zoe arrived with the bread, Teresa announced from the kitchen, the smell of fresh baking invading the veranda. The former cafe owner had become a constant presence at the ranch, bringing not just her baked goods, but also her simple and comforting wisdom. The afternoon tea on the veranda had become a tradition, gathering employees, therapists, and patients, family members. "You know," Mrs. Zoe commented, serving coffee to everyone, "when you showed up that day at my cafe, dressed as a bride and riding thunder, I knew I was witnessing the beginning of something extraordinary." Isabella smiled, remembering that moment that seemed to have happened in another life. Sometimes we need to lose our way to find the right path. Marina, who now coordinated the administrative part of the institute, approached with more news. The scholarship program for underprivileged families has been approved. Starting next month, we'll be able to serve twice as many children. Thunder neighed in the distance as if approving the news. Isabella was still amazed by the special connection she had with the animal. He had truly been her guide, her protector, her link to the truth her parents had fought so hard to preserve. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. It was Isabella's favorite moment at the ranch, when the day's bustle began to calm and she could reflect on the entire journey that had brought her here. "There's one more thing," Samuel mentioned, pulling another envelope from his jacket. "We found the last project your parents were working on before they left. It was a plan to expand the equine therapy program to other states." Isabella took the envelope, feeling the weight of responsibility and honor in her hands. "Then let's make this dream of theirs come true too." That night, after everyone had left and the ranch was quiet, Isabella mounted Thunder for a ride. Under the stars, a habit they had developed together. The horse took her to the highest point of the property, from where they could see the entire expanse of the ranch. The soft lights of the equine therapy center shone in the distance like a beacon of hope in the darkness. The gentle breeze brought the scent of fresh hay and fulfilled promises. There, under the starry sky, Isabella finally felt she was exactly where she should be. It wasn't just about preserving a legacy, it was about transforming it into something even greater, something that would continue touching lives and transforming stories long after she was gone. It was about honoring the past while building a better future. Thunder softly neighed as if reading her thoughts. Isabella caressed his neck, grateful for all the path they had traveled together. "You were right all along, friend," she whispered. "Sometimes we just need to listen to our heart to find the way back home."